welcome everybody. Today we have the next webinar, which is part of the DATAMITE webinars, and this particular will be a part of a training webinar with the title Unlocking the Potential of Open Source DATAMITE. And today we're very glad to have a representative, David Remón from Eclipse, who will take care of this webinar and this training. So, David, the words to you.
Thank you, Adonis. So, good morning, everybody. My name is David Remón. I work in the Eclipse Foundation, and today we are going to have a look at the open source strategy used during the project DATAMITE. So we are going to start with a brief history, of the free software and open source software, going through the licenses, and then we are going to see the open source best practices applied in the DATAMITE project. And finally, we are going to give you the instructions in case you want to contribute to the DATAMITE framework and you want to code or look at the code that we have developed in the project. So we will give you the instructions where to find it, how you can upload or contribute to collaborate with the project. So let's look at the origin of the open source software. And it all started in the 80s. So, by the way, in the MIT in Massachusetts, so there was a printer there, a big one, as you can see in the picture, giving service to a whole laboratory, a few floors, and at some point the printer was replaced by a Xerox 9700, and with the new printer, it arrived. In the old one, in the laboratory, they had the capabilities to send messages, to send an email to each person who had sent a work to be printed. So when the printing was finished, they received an email saying, your work has been printed. And the same way, similarly, when the printer was broken or not available, they received an email saying your work, we have to wait because the printer is not working. These functionalities were provided by a modification in the code. So they had the source code hacked, and they could do that. When the printer machine was replaced by this new Xerox, they lost those functionalities, and they called Xerox and asked for the source code because they wanted to keep the functionalities they already had in the past. And they told them, no, the source code is not provided. So in that moment, they realized that they had a need for the source code. In that laboratory, there was this person here on the right, Richard Stallman. So he was one of the people modifying the code, and he was one of the creators of the free software. He was the main author of the GPL license, famous in that time, and started the Free Software Foundation. Every free software is defined by 4 freedoms. The first freedom is the freedom to run the program as you wish. So you can run a program for entertainment or for military purposes. The second freedom is the freedom to change a program, to study how it works, the application, and to change it. And therefore, you will need access to the source code to modify the program. The third freedom, which is the freedom to redistribute copies of a program, and you can give them as a gift, or you can get money for them. And the fourth freedom is the freedom to redistribute copies of a modified version. And similarly, as we said in the previous freedom, you can give them for free, or you can charge and get money for these copies. Looking at another important person in that time, Linus Torvalds, as you can imagine from his name, Linus was the creator of the Linux kernel. Already in the thesis of his studies, he did the Linux a portable operating system, so he was pretty smart in that time. He created Git, not only Linux but Git as well in 2005, and he's working in the Linux Foundation. So we are talking about free software, and in that time they started mentioning the open source software, because one of the reasons for this is that in English there is an ambiguity with the word free, and it can be as free as in a beer, free beer, or free as in a free speech. And in this case, we are talking about free as in the speech. One person who started the open source movement was David Remón. He wrote this book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. It's available on the internet. It's free, so you can download it. It's 15 pages where he compares building software like a cathedral, centralized. When you publish the beta version, when it's mature, compare with the Bazaar, as Linux was developed, where you release often and early, and there is a distribute model. So in that moment, they started talking about the open source software. And every piece of software to be called open source needs to comply with the open source definition, and it's given by the open source initiative. You can see here in the screen, the open source definition is defined by 10 points. And basically, it's an extension of the 4 freedoms that we saw before. So with this addition of points, they were covering the author, because before, as you saw in the freedoms for the free software, the author of the code was not mentioned. And here, the open source definition keeps the copyright and keeps the right to the author of the source code. And similarly, an open source software needs to be, for example, looking at the last point, technology neutral. So you cannot restrict the use in any platform. You cannot create a piece of software which can run only in Windows and not in Linux or Mac and call it open source, because that software will not be open source. An important aspect of the open source software are the licenses. So we are going to dedicate some time to it. Starting with a question. I think I already asked this to the DATAMITE consortium a while ago, and I will repeat it now. So if you don't add any license information to your code, which rights apply? 1, the copyright, all rights reserved. 2, MIT as the default license. Or 3, nothing at all. Do whatever you want with the code where you don't have any license. So the correct answer for this question is number 1. So if you don't add nothing to your code, there is copyright applied. The intellectual property law is applied to software as it is applied to every book or every music. So every software written after 1978 is automatically protected by restrictive author rights. Therefore, if you find a piece of code on the internet where there is nothing, no license, no header, you cannot use it, because if you use it, you would be stealing. Okay, so it's like a song or a book. If you find a song and you copy it and you use it for your own songs, you are stealing. So in this case, it's the same. Therefore, if you want others to use your code, you need to add the license. You need to add the copyright header. If you don't add anything, nobody can use your code. So the software license is a grant of rights that you are giving to another user to utilize your code, which otherwise they cannot do, because that would be against the law. Okay, so now that we have stated what's a license, I can tell you that there are 116 open source licenses approved by the open source initiative. Well, this was in March 2023, so it's a bit old. Probably now there will be a bit more. There was a trend of creating an open source license for every person. So every developer some years ago wanted to have his own license. And among all these licenses, we are going to look to a couple of examples. First example, the beerware license. It says that you can use the code under this license for whatever you want, but when you meet the author of the code, Paul Henningkamp, in a corridor or in an event or wherever you find him, you can buy him, you can invite him a beer. So clearly, this license is nice and funny, but not approved by the open source initiative. And looking at another example, another license, in this case a bit more popular among the developers, the JSON license. Well, we could think that the JSON license is permissive because we can use the JSON code in our programs without many restrictions. But we can, looking at the text of this license, it says that the software shall be used for good, not for evil. Therefore, there is a discrimination here, and that discrimination is against the 10 points defined before. Therefore, it's not considered open source by the open source initiative. So, among all these licenses, which are considered open source, some of them are not. So the suggestion and the recommendation normally is to opt for a popular license with a strong community behind. If you imagine that you develop an application and you want it to be used. So if somebody in a big company or a corporation is looking at your code and he doesn't know your license, he will go to the lawyers or to the specific department there, and he will ask for advice. And if the license is very exotic and nobody knows it, probably the lawyers in the company will tell him, no, don't use it because we don't know it. On the contrary, if your license, for example, is Apache or MIT or GPL, which are well-known licenses, the lawyers will be confident that you can use the code, and they will tell them, go ahead and use this code because the license is well-known and we know that we are compatible, that our work is compatible with it. All the licenses can be classified in what we call the license spectrum. And I want to remind you again that the license is like the grants that you are giving to the end user. So the software license is the instrument to govern the distribution of software. If there is no license, nobody can use the code. In the license spectrum, on the left, there are in red here in the screen the most restrictive licenses, while on the right in green there are the most permissive licenses, and in the middle all the rest. So starting for the most restrictive, we have the commercial software. This is clearly the classical proprietary license, and it gives a lot of restrictions. So you can imagine, you can think of Microsoft Windows or Office or even a Photoshop software under this category. So with those products, you cannot disassemble the code. You can use the software or the application only in one machine, one person. You cannot resell this software. You cannot rent the use of the machine with the software. So it's quite restrictive. Of course, you don't have access to the source code. This is a classical Windows or Adobe Photoshop or this kind of licenses. Moving towards one a bit more permissive, we have the non-commercial license, which are under this category. You find the licenses which don't conceive any business. So they don't conceive any commercial activity. Here a popular one is Creative Commons, widely used for documentation. And now we start in the group of open source licenses. The first ones, the strong copyleft licenses, are licenses which grant that every derivative work of a software under this license will stay under the same license, which means that if you are using a GPL license library in your code, probably your code will have to be GPL licensed. For that reason, they are called viral licenses as well. We move to the famous weak copyleft licenses, where we can have LGPL3 or Mozilla license. And in this case, these licenses tell you that you can use this software for your purposes, and only the changes or improves to the original weak copyleft license have to stay until this license. Other works can be licensed as you want. Therefore, you can do what you want with the code, and only if you improve the code or you solve a bug or you modify it, those improvements need to be and stay under the same license. So normally what they require you is to be what we call in the Eclipse Foundation a good open source citizen. If you improve the code, you have to give it back to the community, while for the code that you are working, which is a derivative code, you can license it as you want. You can put it under a commercial license and sell it, or you can share it under another permissive license or whatever you want. Now we reach the permissive licenses, well known as well, MIT or Apache, under this category. So a permissive license tells you that you can do whatever you want with your code. You can sell it, you can change the license, make a copy, and make it a proprietary license and sell it. You can modify, improve it, do basically whatever you want. The only requirement that you have is that you need to acknowledge the author. And finally, we reach the public domain. Public domain is where there are no intellectual property rights applied. Normally, it happens because the copyright has already expired. So after 70 years of the publication of the software, if it's done by a group, or 70 years after the only author has passed away, the code, the copyright expires. So the code falls under the category of public domain. Good. So now we have seen like a classification of all the licenses according to their restrictiveness or of the how permissive they are. And now we are going to look at a few stories. We are going to explain the importance of open source in the last years in software development through some stories. Let's start looking at the MQTT protocol. So at the moment, it has become a standard in IoT and in cloud communications as well. But at the beginning, it was invented by IBM, and it was internal to them. So they had MQTT used as a messaging system in their facilities. So they were using it to communicate internally among the workers in IBM and to subscribe and publish some information in some devices in IoT. That happened until 2011, when IBM decided to make it public. So they opened the code, they open sourced MQTT, they published the code under an open source license. And in that moment, as you can see, the use of this code increased dramatically, because before, there was only residual, well, every year it was plain same use because all the IBM workers were using it internally. But since the moment it was public and it was open, it was adopted, and after a few years it was considered a standard in the Internet of Things domain. Let's look at the relationship between Microsoft and the open source software, which is curious as well. So back in the year 2001, the by then CEO of Microsoft said, Linux is a cancer. It contaminates all other software with hippie GPL rubbish. So clearly, his opinion was against Linux and the open source software. But 14 years later, the by then CEO of Microsoft said Microsoft hard Linux. Microsoft loves Linux. Not only that, but 1 year later, Microsoft was the #1 organization in amount of contributors in GitHub, which is a bit surprising after the first sentence from the CEO 15 years ago. And not only this, but 2 years later, Microsoft acquired GitHub for $7.5 billion. We can see the move from the initial thought of the CEO, which hated Linux as a competitor, until the moment in which Microsoft embraced the open source. Let's look at another very popular example and very popular relationship with the open source by Red Hat. Red Hat started in 1995. Probably some of you looking at this video or in this call will know this box here in the middle. So Red Hat was selling a distribution of Linux, which in that moment was free. And the people were saying, well, these guys are crazy. Who think there is going to pay for something which is already free and can be downloaded? But they were adding the services, and they were adding something important in that time, the drivers. So if you were using an operating system in the 90s, if you remember, or in early 2000, when you were using a mouse, keyboard, or any other hardware, you needed the drivers, and it was a nightmare to obtain the drivers. You had to start looking in the floppy disks and CDs, and it was terrible. It took a lot of time. So Red Hat was providing that functionality along with the free Linux distribution in that moment, and it became a success. Red Hat was considered the first open source company worth $1 billion. That was in 2012. In 2018, IBM acquired Red Hat for $34 billion. So, yeah, they were a big success. And Red Hat still works, and they can be, they are partners in other research projects as well. So they are still an important organization in the open source landscape. Okay, so we have seen a brief history of the open source software. We have had a look at the open source licenses, and we have seen different opinions about open source and the evolution along time. And now we are entering the DATAMITE area, and we are going to see how the open source strategy has been applied in the project. And we are going to look at 4 pillars, starting for the first one, infrastructure for open collaboration. So open collaboration in DATAMITE has been enabled as the code which has been developed has been published in GitLab, public repository. This GitLab instance is here. You can find here on the left, you can find a link to the DATAMITE code. and it's all open source. It's all public in that repository there, which is hosted by the Eclipse Foundation, and it's located in Europe, in European servers, which is relevant as DATAMITE project is funded by the European Commission. You can see on the right, we are going to, after the slides, we are going to have a look at the repository, a brief go through, but here you can see a screenshot of the subgroups which compose the DATAMITE project in the repository. Looking at the second pillar, the community and governance. In DATAMITE project, we have followed the 4 open source principles which allow governance and sustainability in the project: transparency, openness, meritocracy, and vendor neutrality. Those are the 4 pillars applied by open source foundations, especially the Eclipse Foundation, which allow the community to work, contribute in a project, and collaborate openly. We are not going to enter into details about these 4 principles. In case any of you is interested of knowing more about them, you can reach out to me or contact me, and I'm happy to talk to you about them. Looking at the third pillar, the IP management, licensing, and compliance. So it's important to keep in mind here that when we develop code, we write only a small part of the code, and the rest, 80 to 90% of the code, according to the statistics, is done by libraries that we are using. Libraries licensed under different licenses, as we saw before, and we need to comply with the requirements which come from those licenses. Similarly, we put a license to our code, and other people using our code will have to comply with the requirement of our license. So in DATAMITE, we have looked at these intellectual property requirements. We have been doing IP checks periodically. We have analyzed 5,200 third-party dependencies, and we have solved the issues. So with among all these more than 5,000 dependencies, around 100 of them were required a closed look, but then afterwards, after spending some time, they were approved, and there were only 5 to 6 critical dependencies, and in those cases we went to each one of them, asked the author of the code to change the license or change the library which was being used until every issue was solved, and the code which was used and the libraries which were being used in DATAMITE were compatible with the license used in DATAMITE, that we will see later. We have been applying the open source best practices as well in DATAMITE, and every repository is public. All the repositories include the MIT license file, because in DATAMITE we have embraced the MIT license, and that's the license used to license all our code. Every repository includes an updated README file to allow their users, other developers, to come to our code and see what we are doing and what they can do with the code. And every file in the repository, every source code file, should have a copyright header, and this is something that we have been doing in the project. And in case there is still some file which doesn't have the header, we will look at that very soon. Among all the software licenses that we saw before that can be applied to a software, in DATAMITE we have been using the MIT license. Therefore, every component in our architecture, you can see here the DATAMITE architecture, all these components that you can see here, regardless they are the front end, data governance module, the backend, or the data quality module, they are all licensed under the MIT license. If an external developer wants to use our code and they find that all the code is licensed under MIT, they will be confident that they can use it. Finally, in terms of ecosystem development, as you know, in a research project, we cannot forget the developers because we need to reach out to them, contact them, because otherwise, if we just publish our Datamite code in GitHub, we will be alone in the middle of more than 400 million repositories. Recently, the last numbers say that there are 800 million repositories in GitHub. That's something that needs to be confirmed. But anyway, if you can imagine, just publishing, adding one more repository to GitHub will not give us any visibility. So we need to do something else. And in Datamite, we have done these actions. So we have published newsletters, developer newsletters. We have done webinars. We have done workshops in conferences. We have gone to events to widespread Datamite. We have been in open source conferences, and even we have been co-organizing a conference on data spaces as well. There are initiatives like the EU Data Plus, which we are leading. The Datamite project is participating on them, and the members of the consortium are very active in this initiative and others like the Big Data Value Association, where we go to their event yearly, and we have been going for the last 3 years. Good. So now we reach the last part of the session, how to contribute to Datamite, because we have been talking of what we have done in Datamite and how the software is open source, the license and everything. But what if I want to contribute to Datamite? I want to have a look at the code and eventually upload my code to the Datamite repository. So this is the Datamite repository. Here you have the URL, pretty easy to find. It's the Datamite under the Eclipse Research Labs in GitLab. And this is the structure that you will find when you go there. If you want not only to have a look at the code, but to contribute to the code, then in that case, you need to join the Datamite Research Labs, and you need to sign the Eclipse Contributor Agreement. These are the instructions, very simple. Once you have signed the agreement, you are enabled to upload your code or to contribute to Datamite. You just have to go there to the repository, request access, request joining the Datamite project, and when you are accepted, normally it happens the same day, you are ready to start contributing to the Datamite project. So now let's have a look at the Datamite repository in GitLab. This will be the last part of the session. We are not going to show any other slide afterwards. So I want to thank you for being here during this time. So let me go in the web browser. I go now to the URL that you saw before.
David, thanks a lot. Can you zoom perhaps a bit more?
Yes, I can do that.
The website.
I can do that. Thank you, Adonis.
Yeah, excellent.
Perfect. I can do it one more time.
Yeah,
perfect, like this.
Thank you,
Adonis. So very briefly, you have here the Datamite project, Datamite repository. It's, as you can see, the architecture is reflected here. The different modules that we have seen under are grouped, as we saw in the architecture: data governance, data quality, data security sharing, and so on. Let's have a look at a random repository. So for example, the data governance backend. If we open this, we see that we have all the source code. And here on the right, we have the license, which is applied, as we said, MIT license. And then we will have a README with the description of what you will find in this sub-repository. Specifically, we are talking about the data governance backend. And similarly, you can find other components, other Datamite components that you will find, and you will see again license, readme updated, and the component that we are talking. So this is how it looks. We have the instructions. So if any developer wants to have a look, start using the code that is found here, or even contributing to it, we would be very glad to welcome to the project and help you with any question you may have. So that's all from my side. Thank you everybody who attended the session and watched the video. Let's see if there are any questions for the live session. Or
Yeah,
any...
if there is any question, you can write it in the chat. Let me check.
For now, there is.
No.
I didn't see any question.
No, only your good morning.
So let's, unless something pops up now, I think that should be all.
Yeah.
If there are further questions after watching the video, so feel free to reach out to me, david.remon@eclipse/foundation. Okay, I saw a message that I saw a message on an internal communication in Slack that the chat is not enabled. So probably that can be one of the reasons.
It looks, let participants send messages. I think it's on. Now it's on. I saw that you perhaps clicked.
I don't know. Okay, so let's see if so I think it's not enabled yet.
I see it enabled. But I'm not a visitor, so a host. Yeah, okay. If there is a question, it will be enabled. We will see it. So no worries. It seems there are no questions.
Okay. Good. Then thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed this session and video. And yeah.
David, thanks a lot for this enlightening session, and I'll see you on the next webinar.
Perfect. Thank you, Adonis, and
Bye-bye. Have a nice day.